to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Sky Waters, a member of City Club's Forum Board and co-producer of today's program with Steph Ruth. For more than a century, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people have come together to find solutions to our region's biggest challenges. We're gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel and are joined by thousands of people via X-Ray FM and its radio stations at 107.1, 91.1 FM, KGW's website, Facebook feed and news app, and Open Signal's community media television. We're incredibly grateful for all the work they do to bring Friday Forum to our community. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, our sponsors, volunteers, and staff enable us to put on Oregon's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank AARP Oregon, Avangrid Renewables, and SEIU 49 for the generous support for this and all of Friday Forums this fall. Please show our appreciation to everyone who has made this event possible with a round of applause. On Tuesday, we saw incredible energy from voters. Turnout was high across the country. Here in Oregon, 69% of eligible voters returned ballots. That represents 1.9 million voters, breaking the previous record set in 2014 for a midterm election. At least 350,000 more Oregonians voted in this election than 4 years ago. It's clear that Oregonians care about the direction of our politics and our government are taking. But now that the votes are in, what does all this civic energy translate into? What are the underlying trends driving Oregon politics? And how will the leaders who just won our votes lead over the next 2 years? Joining us today to analyze the 2018 election are 3 women who are leading political movements that are reshaping the political landscape in Oregon. Ana Del Rocio is the state director of Color PAC Action, a nonprofit that uplifts leaders of color to enter public office and govern effectively. She is also a former elected member of the David Douglas School Board. Jillian Shoney is the co-executive director of Emerge Oregon, an organization that recruits and trains women to run for office. In addition to her work with Emerge, she is board vice chair for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Oregon. Rebecca TWEED was a campaign advisor to Oregon gubernatorial candidate Newt Bueller. She's the executive director of Grow Oregon, the founder of TWEED Strategies, and an of-council consultant to Gallatin Public Affairs and G2 Public Strategies in the Pacific Northwest. Moderating our discussion today is Len Bergstein, founder and president of Northwest Strategies. He's a political consultant who has roots in Oregon going back more than 40 years. You may have also seen him on KGW as a political analyst. Now please join me in welcoming Len and our panelists.
Thanks, Guy. Let me start off with 2 other introductions. We have in the House former U.S. Senator Bob Packwood. And the president, former president for City Club, Harriet Watson, who's also in the audience. So let's get started. Good afternoon. I'm going to give a couple of remarks, and then you're going to hear from the panelists that you actually came to listen to. We're going to have a spirited discussion that I'm going to try and guide with some questions, and then get into all of the races, and then we have a chance for the entire audience. So the 2018 elections in Oregon had something for everyone. Here's my 4 top takeaways. Number 1, what started as a close race for governor developed into a reliably blue outcome, with the incumbent Kate Brown beating Newt Bueller by a decisive, better-than-average 6% margin. Second, Oregon trounced 4 statewide measures backed by fragments of the business community and conservative groups, certain conservative groups. The success of the No campaign was contributed to a widespread progressive coalition that coordinated an impressive voter outreach campaign that generated a surge of voters that Sky talked about. Third, the Portland metropolitan area voters overwhelmingly approved a measure to finance affordable housing and a clean energy initiative. Most notably was the leadership role of Color PAC, communities of color, and low-income communities. They linked with traditional progressive groups, such as environmental activists and groups advocating for labor union members and working families in a way that the city hadn't seen before. Number 4, a race to replace Dan Saltzman on the city council had historic overtones, electing the first black woman to the council. In the contest between Joanne Hardesty and Loretta Smith, the voters expressed their desire for more change at City Hall, really, and decisively responded to Joanne Hardesty's more activist, anti-establishment message. So our panelists, Rebecca, Anna, and Jillian, are well qualified to discuss these elections and other interesting campaign topics, such as the leadership role of women, the impact of money, and what we can expect from the state legislature with its Democratic supermajorities and from our new city council. They are highly regarded strategists, field organizers, and campaign operatives who played key roles in our 2018 election and will help shape Oregon politics for years to come. Together, this panel will help us make some sense of how this relatively low-drama election contains so many important lessons about the way we will campaign and govern into the future. Now let's jump into the questions. Before we dive into specific campaigns, let's talk about the record number of women and diverse candidates who are running for office and leading political campaigns. Jillian, let's start with your organization, Emerge. They've been recruiting and supporting women candidates for 10 years. Help us understand the role women are playing today in our politics.
Well, I think not only was it the year of the woman, it was the year of women of color. And what happened here and nationally is to be celebrated. So please, yeah. And what is also so amazing about it is that it wasn't simply that women won. It was new women who for the first time stepped forward and stepped into politics, were running and winning. One thing that I appreciate about Emerge and the national network is that because we started 10 years ago, other chapters are a bit older than us, we were ready to receive women when the wave did come. And I think, I just love that we were working on running women before they were the popular brand. But because we were ready to receive them, we could receive them and we could push them right back out there on the campaign trail, and they delivered. We had an 82% win rate here in Oregon, 100% of our city council races run, and y'all, those running for city council in Staten and Independence and Newport, those are lonely races to run, and especially as a Democratic woman in red part of the states, it's really hard. We had a woman run for Lane County Commission and won a Democrat in the East Lane County seat, which is really hard. We lost that race 4 years ago by 74 votes, and Heather Buck this year just blew her Republican incumbent out of the water. It was amazing. Catherine Harrington, who's here, we flipped Washington County Commission now. We flipped Clackamas County back in 2016. So I think we were ready to receive these women, which I'm incredibly proud of. And just a few national notes. I loved that the first 4 Democrats that were elected as governors, and the first to flip, who were women, was the governor of Guam, which I just loved. Was our first win of the election night on Tuesday nationally. The only U.S. Senate pickup for Democrats was a woman, and then of course 96 House seats, as y'all probably know. And the last point that I want to make is that it's not just about the candidates. The gender and racial diversity of the teams who were running these candidate campaigns and also issue campaigns were also heavily led by women and women of color. I believe Andrea Cooper, who ran the governor's race here in Oregon, was the only woman of color running a governor's race in the entire country, and the coordinated team with Kathleen Stewart and Becca Yorblau, Hannah Love, and the staffers that were running the ballot measures. Many of them were women and women of color. And I have to say, when I'm starting to reflect on Election Day, the staffing of all of that followed getting women elected to leadership positions. So we've elected 16 state legislators now, and they worked hard and intentionally to hire women and women of color on their teams.
So Rebecca, what are the Republican and business groups that you're associated with doing to try and tap into this talent pool?
Well, I run most of them, so there's one. But yeah, no, I think it's been very interesting, and Jillian and I have spoken on panels together, and I've always shared this story. One of my first stories of feeling like I was relevant in politics was sitting in a room with 7 old white guy consultants when I was 25 years old, and they were talking about how do we talk to women about education, and here are the mailers, and here's this, and I'm thinking, I don't subscribe to any of that. I don't want kids, I don't want any of this, but I care about education, and here's how my voice can be heard. And here's what I think we should be doing, and here's how I think we should change the conversation that we're having. So I think there's a lot of conversation changing that needs to happen. I think the work that Jillian and Emerge does is incredible. I think we have amazing women running. When I think of women and communities of color and folks from diverse experiences running and being more involved, I think that's a reflection of how exciting it is to be involved in politics right now. I mean, you heard from Sky that voter turnout has increased, and some nerdy folks will say, well, that's because proportionally voter registration's increased and blah, blah, blah. No, I think it's because people care right now. People are interested in what's happening in their life. I'm a 35-year-old single woman without kids, but I will tell you, every single time I have to slow down in a school zone, I know where all the police are on my street, I care about my trash pickup. There's a whole different world that people are involved in right now. And I think what we're seeing is a very exciting reflection of how people are running. And I think some of it should be acknowledged as identity politics, and some of it should be acknowledged as communities of color, and I think that's incredible. I also think we have to acknowledge that people in general are more interested. I've never had more phone calls, I've never had more emails, I've never had more diverse outreach working on a campaign, and I've worked in Oregon politics for 13 years, than I did on this cycle of people just saying, hey, I care about this one issue. Who do I talk to? And I will say, it's your city councilor in Clatsop County. I know you saw my name, but you need to call this person. You need to run for something. You need to get involved, and I think it's a really incredible movement. So I think, I can't speak on behalf of the entire business community or the Republican Party, but I think what I can speak at is that we know that Oregon is changing, and we need to be changing, and I think this election reflects where Oregonians are and what matters to them. And whether it's in Multnomah County that has always had a very strong movement towards one direction, or it's somewhere in Eastern Oregon where they elected somebody we didn't expect, our job, and everybody's job in this room that cares, is to listen to that. And what does that actually mean moving forward?
Anna, help us in the room understand more about Color Pack and how you work with the groups, particularly the candidates you're most interested in.
Sure. Color Pack exists to uplift people of color to enter public office and govern effectively all across Oregon. 4 years ago, when we were founded, the landscape of people of color in office looked very differently than it does now. I think in the beginning, there was just a very clear mandate: get people of color elected. There was a dearth of representation. There was not enough of that direct connection between people of color and accountability to communities of color on the ground. What we have discovered since then in the last 4 years is a couple of things. One, it's not enough to just be a person of color if you're not also actively accountable to the issues that matter to communities of color, if you're not also very much in alignment with the values that matter to communities of color. If there's anything that we've learned in this last cycle, it's that we are pro-immigrant, pro-reproductive rights, pro-democracy, pro-education, pro-civil rights. That is the kind of candidate of color we are supporting and upholding and uplifting. In addition to that, we're seeing nationwide a parallel in the success rates of people of color who are progressive people of color. In Oregon, if you look at the legislative races this past cycle, we had an 87.5% win rate in progressive candidates of color, a 90% rate of defeat in conservative candidates of color. What does that tell us? In Oregon, when it comes to representation of people of color, we are specifically looking at how are we advancing a racial justice agenda through election of people of color that represent communities of color in Oregon. And we are here and we are present. 4 out of 10 children in Oregon are kids of color, a quarter are Latino. We are a changing, rapidly changing demographic that will continue to receive support and continue to receive the training we need to get into office, but also to succeed post-election. That's the other major thing we've learned in the past 4 years, and one thing we've tried to really practice this last year is not considering election day the finish line, but rather the starting post. Because the great victory, the actual victory at play will happen when these elected officials are able to pass policies, change practices that will impact the daily lived experiences of communities of color on the ground. I'm not gonna benefit, I did not benefit on Tuesday night when Joanne won, but I will benefit when she works to change police practices and stop racial profiling in the streets. That's when the victory will come. And what are we doing as communities of color that are supporting candidates post-election to support them on the governance side to make sure there's success and support before you come in with these traditional notions of punitive accountability to elected officials of color? There's a different dynamic when you are part and parcel of the success for an elected official. It's a different dynamic because you're not working against them as much as you are working with them in collaboration, in shared governance models. And that's one thing that we've seen implemented at every level, from city, county, state, in Oregon. We know there were a couple of really high-profile races, but really we saw dozens of people of color on the ballot in Oregon, again, at every single level, including our first Supreme Court judge of color, Justice Adrian Nelson. So we're making great progress, but we have a lot more work to be done. We still don't have a statewide office holder or someone in DC representing us who's a person of color. So there's a lot of progress to be made, but we did make great strides in November, and we will continue to do so.
Thanks. That's good. Let's switch then into the impact of coalitions and of interest groups. Rebecca, let's start with you. How would you characterize the prominence of coalitions in politics in Oregon this last cycle?
You know, I think they're really important. I think they've always been really important, but I think as the awareness of politics and what I spoke about earlier of people wanting to know who they're voting for and what they're voting for, the credibility of who supports those efforts has become much stronger. Because I don't know, if you're like me, it's really hard to pay attention to everything going on. Sometimes you have to just figure out where your supporters are, groups that you support are, and what they're part of. And I hate to even admit it, but as somebody who runs campaigns for a living, there's times I go through my voters pamphlet statement, I'm like, I don't know anything about this person, but who's their endorsements, and that's who I vote for. That's become more prominent than ever, I think. And I think not even what coalitions support these issues, but that people want to be part of one, right? And we've seen that, and I think that's really, really strong, is I think we've had more folks in this last 2 years than we've had ever before in Oregon joining coalitions, signing up to endorse events, becoming part of the communities of color PACs, and part of, you know, I was involved in the Measure 26201 campaign. That was the Portland gross receipts tax. Their coalition was unbeatable. I mean, it was just incredible people, because folks want to belong to something that has a voice, where they think they can be part of something. And as the campaign manager for Measure 97, that was one of the strongest coalitions I think our state has ever seen. And I think that ignited that people said, hey, we should get involved. We need to be doing something. If we can be part of a coalition, we can be part of a movement. Maybe we can't run for office right now. Maybe we don't know all the people we're going to vote for. Maybe we can't support something financially, but doggone it, we're going to sign up for something, and we're part of something now. And I think we're seeing a political movement across the state and across the nation where people want to be part of something. That's why we've had more people running for office than ever. It's why we've had higher voter turnout than ever. And I think it's why we've had larger coalitions. So I think the coalition movement or the endorsement movement is going to continue to grow. I think we'll see another couple of years where that becomes what people are really focused on. Who's part of the campaign, who's part of the team, who's endorsing this this movement, and how do we get people to be credibly part of it. But I think it's the biggest part of what we're doing now. I think it could actually play a larger role, especially in Oregon. It could play a larger role than campaign dollars at some extent.
Anna, I'm going to go to you next, but I've got to make a kind of transition to the audience. So for our radio audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Len, president of Northwest Strategies. Joining us today are Anna, the state director of ColorPAC, Jillian, co-executive director of Emerge Oregon, and Rebecca, executive director of Grow Oregon. Let's go back to the question. How did your groups kind of integrate into coalitions?
We weren't formally part of any coalitions. I will say that I can't overstate the importance of coalitions when it comes to especially the field component of success for candidates and for issues, for ballot measures. We know elections can't be bought, and why? Because of the strength of people power. And who turns out people power, who mobilizes people power, are those coalitions that have strong bases, membership bases. We see, for example, in Florida, the new Florida majority engaging in a really specific kind of coalition-based voter outreach effort that was targeting the unlikely voters, the young people, the women, the people of color that had never voted before, and doing so in a way that was very persuasive because it involved campaign staff, campaign volunteers that were of the community. It's much more persuasive when someone that you have grown up with in the same neighborhood, gone to school with, knocks on your door than someone that you've never seen before in your life. So they had over 5.5 million attempts to reach over 2 million unlikely voters. Those efforts were hugely successful. And in Oregon, our coalitions and our ability to really put our money where our mouth is in terms of empowering people to engage in more civic involvement, including voter turnout, than ever before, especially in places like East County. East County Rising, for example, really focused on knocking on thousands of doors, again, targeting unlikely voters, those who were not typically, they didn't have a record of turning out to elections, but they obviously had a stake in the outcome. And in doing that, for 105, statewide in many areas as well, it was really a concerted effort to expand the voting pool, expand the electorate, because we're looking at not just a win in specific campaigns, but we're looking at transforming actual voting rights and civic engagement in Oregon. And historically, the quote-unquote community and the quote-unquote electorate have not been the same. It's been very different. So when you expand people that are able to feel they have access to voting, that it's in their interest to vote by having conversations, you can never undo that work or that progress. Regardless of the outcome of the recount in Florida or in Georgia, all the conversations that domestic workers had, for Stacey Abrams, that new Florida majority members had, for Andrew Gillum, those conversations will never be undone. Those doors will never be unknocked. And that is progress that is priceless. It will stay, and it will be the foundation of future efforts, coalition-driven efforts to increase voter turnout and increase voter enfranchisement.
Great. Jillian, how about your take on coalitions?
To pivot off all that Anna addressed, I would just say there were 600 organizations that came together on the left side to support Kate Brown, to make sure those ballot measures went our way, and that is historic. And the 2,000 individuals who turned out in the last 10 days to knock on 400,000 doors is amazing. And I kudos to everybody who worked on that effort and everybody who showed up in their communities knocking on those doors. But I want to point out, it just didn't come from nowhere. The left has been working on building a larger, more diverse coalition for a number of years. If you look at the legislative agendas that get pushed down in Salem, years ago, those coalitions got more broad, larger tables. In the endorsement process for candidates, putting my Planned Parenthood hat on, we asked about Measure 88. We asked about minimum wage. We asked about affordable housing. We don't just ask our candidates about reproductive rights when we interview them. So while we have sort of our top tier issue, if you will, as Planned Parenthood, reproductive rights, we also respect and acknowledge and support the top issue of all of the other organizations. And so that has been happening really, I would say 2011-ish, where I really saw our questionnaires, everything was being cross-referenced and supporting one another. And we have built toward what was a historic coalition effort for this cycle. And just to pivot off of what Anna said, like most of the time we don't have more money than the other side, but we always do have more people. I had some of the most, I canvassed in 4 different counties this year, and I had some of the most amazing conversations I've ever had.
Great. Okay, now that you've warmed up, let's jump into the governor's race. Rebecca?
Let's.
Yeah. Most of the media have identified this as a race that Newt Buehler could have won, $17 million and some wind in his sails. What happened?
You know, I feel like we ran a very good campaign. I feel like Newt did a great job running the campaign. It was a very interesting time to be a Republican running in Oregon with a candidate that I feel best represented what we thought Oregonians represented and what they wanted and what they voted on. And, you know, I said I wouldn't say this on the record, but I'll say it on the record. Because I can now. You know, I knew that it would either be a close race if Newt won, or it would be 5 or 6 points with Governor Brown winning, because I feel like that's reflective of where the state electorate is. And I think that's what we saw. I don't know that we could have run a better campaign to represent our candidate, honestly, and to represent the work that everybody put into it. But at the end of the day, Oregonians have different perspectives than what a Republican candidate could do for them. I also feel like, not just with Newt, but with campaigns and candidates we saw across the state and across the country, there's still a national impact, and there certainly should be. You know, we can't just be Oregon and not have what happens in Washington, D.C., or what happens in these other states, or what these other issues are, not impact what we are emotionally feeling. And Oregonians are emotional voters. They're smart voters. Certainly, my hope and investment was that the governor's race would go a different way, but I think we ran a good campaign, and I think at the end of the day, there were more voters that agreed with Governor Brown's leadership than what Newt could provide.
Jillian, public polls seem to show that the governor was on the defensive almost up until September, and yet she pulled out a decisive victory. How did she turn it around?
Ooh, she was always up.
Okay.
So let's just recognize that about polling, that media does not know how to report on it. And if a candidate is consistently up, the candidate is winning. It's not close. 6 points is not close. So that is the performance of gubernatorial candidates in this state, for the record. So let's just put that to bed. I think authenticity, credibility, and trust matter. And Newt Buehler didn't have any of those things. You can't vote one way and then say something completely different at the campaign trail, on the campaign trail. Voters are smart, and they saw through that. And it didn't help when he was hiding his taxes, and when the 28th richest person on the planet funded his campaign, to the tune of $4.5 million at the end of the day, direct and indirect. He had no authenticity, credibility, or trust, and that's what won the day. Kate Brown had it.
Anna, do you have a take on the governor's race?
I don't have much to add beyond that. We were not involved closely in the governor's race, but I agree with what she said.
We could put me in the middle just to balance it out, like a little sandwich of opinion. Yeah.
Let's come back. I'll give you a chance to kind of answer the different question I'm going to ask. So you mentioned President Trump. Was he on the ballot in Oregon, do you think?
He wasn't, but I think that there was a lot of national activity and energy that made it very difficult for Republicans to win. I feel like when I say that, it sounds like an excuse, and it's not. Campaigns need to be run individually, and candidates need to be run individually. But Governor Brown certainly did her best to make Newt Buehler seem like President Trump, even though they have nothing in common, and he has not supported President Trump. But I think we have to be aware of what that energy does. And we have to do that with every issue. We have to do that with ballot measures. We have to do that with state representatives. There's always going to be an impact on what's happening in the national environment, or any political environment is going to impact campaigns.
Let me skip ahead to other questions. Pick one ballot measure, if you can, please, that you thought was emblematic of the campaign, that you really cared about, and describe it a little bit so that we can hear about it. Anna, you want to start with it? One ballot measure. It could be a statewide measure, or it could be one of the local measures.
Emblematic of what exactly?
Of what was going on in the Oregon electorate right now. You mentioned just a couple minutes ago the immigration issue and some others, but I'm just wondering if you were looking at the broad range of ballot measures, was there one that said, oh, wow, that's what Oregonians were really kind of deciding here?
I can't say that there was. I mean, I know what turns out voters is a combination of what is exciting on the ballot and candidates and ballot measures. I think the combination of motor voter, automatic voter registration, and who was on the ballot candidate-wise was very enticing. It didn't hurt that the immigration and reproductive rights issues were also on there because we know those are rights that are very important to communities of color. But I can't say that there was one that, I will say it was very heartening to see how annihilated the 105 ballot measure really was. There has been a lot of fear and trepidation when it comes to the immigration issue, and it was very positive outcome. But whether it was emblematic, I'm not sure, because I think it is a balance of candidates and ballot measures that really resulted in the turnout that we saw, and the turnout is the key, I think, story here. Yeah.
Jillian, have you got a insight on this?
It is hard to pick just one, particularly given because on the left it was all done through coalition. But I guess I will focus on the affordable housing one, because safe, stable housing is so fundamental to everything else that I'm really proud and thankful that those two measures passed successfully. And because that issue is so near and dear to my heart, I will tell you, I was horrified when I got one of the mail pieces for the Pro 103 campaign that literally made it look like it was against the affordable housing ballot measure, and it was immoral. And that, between that and the small business owners of color who were convinced to come out against the clean energy ballot measure, horrifying, and I hope neither of those tactics ever happen again in Oregon politics.
Rebecca, same question. A ballot measure you'd pick to talk about?
Sure. I think Measure 105 was the most reflective of where Oregonians are right now. And regardless of what side you were on that, I think that measure was really important to voters. I think it was really important to Oregonians to feel like either way they had a position to state on sanctuary status and immigration and just part of that movement. And I won't say where I stand on it, but I think that was the most important measure that Oregon had to face. And, you know, we had other important measures that were on the ballot, and I think a lot of those measures can be addressed in other ways if you disagree with how the turnout came out. But I think Measure 105 was the one that I felt Oregon could really put their stamp on. And I'm sure many folks are very pleased with how it turned out, because that's what Oregon said they wanted very strongly on election night.
You know, Jillian, in our pre-conversation, you said they put our values on the ballot. It was very kind of like stunning to me that you kind of characterized that way. Do you want to kind of build on that thought at all?
Well, I think the state made it absolutely clear, and the mandate for Democrats is very clear. We are a pro-choice, pro-immigrant, pro-education, pro-affordable housing state, and we need to deliver on that. And I'm sure you're going to ask about the supermajority later, but I think the direction of this state is clear, and for the first time, it's like we are a blue state. We have largely, I've always thought Oregon has been purple, but no, it is clear with this election what the voters want, and we need to deliver.
I do want to get to the supermajority if we have enough time, but I want to jump over to the city council race. If you had one bit of advice for the newest city council person in terms of issues that she takes on or style of office in the way she relates to her other commissioners, Anna, what advice would you whisper in Joanne Hardesty's ear?
For Portland. I mean, I think Joanne did a fantastic job, continues to do a fantastic job. She had a strong reputation in communities of color preceding her candidacy. I really want to just drive home this point that it's hard to come from a position of advice giving, because what we need to do is support Joanne. Because we've all been a part of her success, we are somewhat responsible now to making sure she is successful post swearing in. Does she have everything that she needs? Does she have the support that she needs? Does she have the conversations and relationships that she needs to really be our leader? Maya Angelou said, I come as one, I stand as 10,000. Joanne is our tens of thousands. And what we need to do is show up for her when she needs us before we're in a position to give advice or criticism or any kind of punitive measures. She is making history. She will continue to do so. I'm very proud of her, and I'm grateful that she's my city councilor.
Great, let's go.
I would like to just add on that because I think we have to start looking at leadership differently. It isn't just, and recognizing different leadership styles. And I think that was particularly evident in some of the sexism that played out in the gubernatorial race, that it isn't, Kate Brown can't do this alone. Joanne Hardesty can't do this alone. We have to support our leaders in positive and productive ways and have their backs, and also acknowledge when women lead differently. This part of this coalition work is because we had Kate Brown at the top of the ticket. She required the campaign to be run in that way. That has never happened before. And so this is how women lead differently, and our newspapers need to start recognizing it, including everybody else, and Democrats too. I was in a Multnomah County Democrats meeting one night where literally a male gentleman said, a Democrat said, "Can't we just make her look taller in her commercials so she looks more like a leader?" No. We have to stop. I'm serious. Like, the sexism is appalling, and I should have not been caught off guard by it this time around, because when I was on her race in 2012 for Secretary of State, and the first time she beat Newt Bueller, I saw it then. I saw it in the media then. I shouldn't have been surprised by this time, but we have a lot of work to do, all of us.
Rebecca, comments?
Sure. Well, I think I agree with Jillian and Anna that we need to do what we can to support our leaders. I mean, I want everybody to do well. I don't care if I voted for them or I didn't vote for them, or they're a male or a female, or I don't care. What I want is a better state, and I want better cities, and I want a better place for us to live. And I think we all need to figure out what we need to do to get to that place. And as individuals and as a state, we're having a hard time doing that, right? We're a partisan state. We have a hard time believing with people. There's lots of people that I voted for that I don't even like, but I'm like, dang it, they probably do the job fine, and then you got to get behind them in a little bit. We all want that for our state, and I think that's what can make Oregon great. We are a blue state, and I don't always love that because whatever, but it keeps me employed. But we are a great state, and we are a great room of individuals. Everybody in this room has a different opinion about something, but we're here because we care about something, and we're here because we care about our state. And I think we can get there if we can get past everything else and just say, look, I don't want the supermajorities to fail. That doesn't do me any good for the legislature to not do well. I'm not happy that some of my candidates lost. I'm not happy that Newt Bueller's not governor, but I don't want Kate Brown to not do well as governor. That's what we've been hoping for. We ran a campaign against that because we didn't think she was doing that well enough, but she has been elected as governor by the state, by people in this room. I hope the governor does well. I hope the supermajorities do well. I hope the city council does well. I hope the Clean Energy Fund actually does what it said it was going to do. We all want those things. We just have to get through this tumultuous political environment where we can sit on a panel together and say we want Oregon to do well, even though we've all run campaigns against each other, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So I don't know what that looks like. I hope for Joanne, I think what she will bring is a new energy. I think she really wants to listen to the citizens of Portland. I'm not one, but I watch it enough, and I think that's what Portland needs. They need to feel like somebody's listening to them. And I hope that some people are listening to her and they disagree, and they show up at city council meetings. And I hope some people listen to her and they do agree and they support her in whatever she's doing. But that's what we really want to do, I think.
Good thoughts. Anna, you wanted to add another thought?
I did, yes. The Portland City Council is one of few elected roles that actually pay a living wage. Overwhelmingly, we do not see our elected officials of color receiving the compensation that they need. And what Color PAC is looking to do in our leaders that we recruit and train is what we're asking them to do is not public service as usual. We're not asking them to step into a role and operate the way others have operated before. We're asking them to transform, fundamentally transform the way government is and the way government works for communities of color. Yet we're not paying them enough, we're not supporting them enough, and they're willingly stepping up to face what every high-level person of color in Oregon knows well is the isolation, the implicit and explicit racism, microaggressions. We're asking them to do a bigger job than others have done with less support and less pay. That has to flip before we can actually see the transformation that we're requiring, and beyond just the city council and beyond just state legislative races, but for all the school boards and all the people of color that are stepping into public service that deserve to be held by community outside when they're not being held inside.
Great. We have just a couple minutes before we turn to questions, and so make this last answer quick if you can. Supermajority to the legislature. The club cares a lot about issues like healthcare, housing, and education. What do you see coming out of the legislature in this issue, or what do you hope the direction is for people to kind of either resist on this or to engage fully on this issue? Do you want to start, Rebecca?
Sure. I hope that citizens of Oregon get very engaged in a supermajority. And I was the political director for the House Republicans in 2010 when we got to a 30-30 for the first time in Oregon. And I think you could ask every legislator, every staffer, every leader that said that was probably one of the most successful years we had, because we had to have a conversation. We had to talk to each other. We shared a gavel. We had more work we had to do together. I'm hoping that even with the supermajority, we can figure out a way to have a conversation, and we can take it away from being sides of the aisle, which is the way we talk about it, and say what's really best for Oregon. Can we actually get education funding improved? Can we actually figure out what we need to do to improve the environment? Can we actually address all of these issues and not have it have to be one-sided? So I think we'll see a lot of progressive issues come out, and that term usually is negative when it's used by somebody who doesn't say they're progressive, but I don't mean it that way. I just think we'll see a lot of really issues that are on the forefront, because that's what Oregon usually does. And I'm just hopeful that the business community and the unions and the citizens of Oregon can work together and say, this is what we think would be best, this is what we support, and if we don't like it, we're going to call your office, we're going to email your office, we're going to make it happen in the news, and we're going to have some really good things come out. But I think it'll be a challenging 6 months.
Jillian, grand bargain in our future?
Let me say first that, again, this is our moment to really declare Oregon blue. I mean, I think that's the message we got from voters, but now we need to deliver on the public policy side, right? And I just want to point out that those of us on this side still have Peter Courtney to deal with. He needs to step up or step aside. We are ready to get stuff done.
Anna, any thought? We're going to move to Q&A here. Is that okay?
Move, yeah.
All right, good. We're going to, let's I knew this panel would be exciting. I'm glad it's proved to be out. So for our radio ones, this is City Club of Portland, Friday Forum. I'm Len, president of Northwest Strategies. Joining us today, you've heard Anna, who's the state director of ColorPAC, Jillian, who's the co-executive director of Emerge Oregon, and Rebecca, who's the executive director of Grow Oregon. Now we're going to go to the audience for questions. Everyone watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. If you've written a question on an index card, hold it up for the staff to collect, and you may submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag FRIDAYFORUM. To City Club members who would like to ask a question, you know the drill. Please identify yourself as a member and ask one question in 30 seconds or less. So are people like to ask a question? We have questions?
Carol Witherell, City Club member. The mass murder of this week was number 307 in 311 days. And I know all of our sympathies go out to those families and fears as well. And I'm wondering what you think the impact will be on gun violence and responsible gun legislation with the dramatic increase of women now in our government at many levels. Can you speak to that?
Great. Rebecca, you want to start off?
Sure.
And we'll just work down the line. Thanks
Yeah,
very much.
thank you,
Thanks
Carol,
the
for that really important question. I think that we are absolutely not doing enough to address why violence is happening in America. through guns or other means that folks are taking to express their mental health issues. I think it'll be something that's a really high priority. I think Governor Brown and Representative Newt Buehler did a good job supporting legislation in this last session to close the boyfriend loophole bill that addressed a number of gun violence issues that we had, but I hope it's a conversation we have. I don't have the answers on what would be a gun control or gun violence or mental health issue that we would address or how we would tackle it, but I think it's something we need to be talking about. I think we need to be doing more to support people that feel like they're in that position.
Julian?
I'm done talking about it. I want gun sense legislation to pass at the congressional level, more in the state. Like I'm done. I'm done talking about it. And I want to highlight, some of the women that ran across the country ran on this issue. Lucy McBath in Georgia, who won. She's an Emerge alum, and her son was a victim of gun violence. And we need to change this now.
Anna?
I agree. I think that on the public policy side now is a time where voters are watching and seeing the verifying part of the vetting and verifying sort of line of candidate training and recruitment. The verification, how are you actually showing up post-election? Can you actually keep your promises? We're watching very closely, and I think everyone's asking themselves, oh wow, how am I showing, improving, and demonstrating my commitment and accountability to communities of color? Because, oh, well, maybe I'm going to be vulnerable on my left, who knows? Everyone's watching, and we're paying attention closely, and I agree with Jillian, we have to solve the problem ASAP.
To the microphone.
A question for Anna. I think I heard you say in your opening remarks about a sort of a lopsided result, progressive versus conservative with your color pack. And I guess I'm just curious how you think about that. Are you going to begin to develop conservative candidates within color pack and outside of Multnomah County? Or are you just going to be a progressive organization, or how do you think about that?
We are a progressive organization. We have a set of issues that we're very closely screening our candidates by, and when it comes to looking at the rate that just happened this November, we've learned that it was a noble effort on the part of the conservative agenda, I think, to put a person of color up in front of you, but what Joanne said in her acceptance speech was, voters can tell the difference between two black women. Voters can tell the difference between a person of color who is and is not accountable to us. And the Cook brothers invested $400 million reportedly in this last election, much of it on candidates and causes that are conservative on the ballot. And in Oregon, I think that there was an effort to do a similar investment to attract voters via a person of color, which we know is an effective technique. But in Oregon, it's not working because we are a blue state, we are progressive, and Color PAC especially will continue to build a progressive bench of people of color for office.
Bobby?
Bobby Regan, City Club member. I heard yesterday that Speaker Pelosi is looking at reestablishing the Congressional Climate Committee to deal with climate disruption. And my question to you is, do you believe that we are going to make the most progress on climate disruption at the national level, or the state level, or the local level?
Great. Rebecca, you want to take a whack at that?
Sure, although I can be a stereotypical Republican and say I'm not really sure. I do think that we will make strides locally, statewide, and nationally. I think we're seeing Oregon take a lot of those steps forward. The Portland Clean Energy was part of that. I think you'll see it in the legislative session. It will come forward. And then certainly with what's happening on the national level, I think we'll make a lot of steps. I don't know which one will be stronger, but I think it'll be a major part of what people address in 2019.
Jillian, comment?
Well, I sure as hell hope so. I think a lot of people have given up on Congress, right, particularly on this issue, among many others. And you've had local officials and state officials sort of creating the momentum for this issue on the local level. Joelle Davis has fought for it. Everything that Tualatin City Council can do to fight climate change, she's been working on it. One of our candidates down in Ashland ran strictly on a climate change agenda, taking on an incumbent because, they have a plan, but the council has not followed through on it. So I just really appreciate the pressure that is being created on the ground level to push upward to make sure that our state governments across the country and Congress will finally act.
Anna, any comment?
I do think it will come from the bottom up. I think we've seen great strides. Multnomah County just passed an environmental justice resolution. I think we're seeing an increased attention to this issue, but I do think it has to have a base of people on the ground that has to be driving solutions upwards to entities at every level.
Harriet?
Harriet Watson, past president of City Club, and I'd like to first thank the City Club staffer for lowering the mic so I do look taller. What effect, if any, do you think the national progressive movements like Indivisible and Flippable had in the Oregon races?
Jillian, you want to take a whack at that?
Well, they brought new people in. And the woman who was running against Greg Walden, she's an Emerge alum, Jamie McLeod Skinner, I think the particularly women involved in those groups who surrounded her, she had, I mean, in months, she had over 400 volunteers that her small, tiny little, primarily unpaid staff was trying to manage. And I have to give credit to Indivisible Bend in particular for showing up. And, you know, I think just more and more people are more inclined, like a point that was said earlier, to show up and knock on those doors, and that's what we need.
I'll come back to others on the panel, but Steve, if you've got a question.
First of all, Jillian, I was rather disturbed when you said the Democrats only flipped one Senate seat, and I hope that doesn't mean that you have depressing insider information from Maricopa County.
Oh, in Arizona? Is it still TBD?
Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah, no, yeah. She's up right now, she's up.
So my question, though, is for Boss Tweed, which is, Newt Bueller took two remarkable positions in the campaign. He said he was for a carbon tax and for converting the personal kicker to a rainy day fund. Can we count on him to spend the next few years converting every other Republican to those positions?
Rebecca.
Only if he calls me on Monday. Yeah. You know, I hope so. I think that Newt did what a lot of more moderate conservatives in this state were hoping for, and I didn't agree with Newt on every single issue, but there were a number of reasons that I thought he would be a good leader. And some of those issues were those issues, and I think that is where Oregonians want to go, and I think that is where more conservative voters need to be headed to understand where we can move our state. So if anybody wants to call and get my opinions, I'm happy to give them, including Newt.
Let me get one question in from the audience. So at the end of the day, would you say that this election, Oregon stands more united or more divided? Let's go down the list. Maybe, Anna, if you don't mind starting with that one, and then we'll just go down the list.
More united or more divided? I mean, based on, if you're looking at just these past election results, you could say united. It's complicated, but yeah,
Right.
obviously.
Right. Jillian?
Thank you. I'm going to say more united. I am always an optimist, and maybe I'm blinded by the amazing level of coalition work, but it was beautiful, and I'm exhausted, but it was amazing, and I think it'll be carried forward.
Okay. Rebecca?
I think scientifically more united. I mean, the margins in these campaigns were larger than we've seen in decades. But I think the political environment in general is more divided than ever. And I think people have been trying to figure out how to balance that in running campaigns. We used to say, okay, there's 10% on this side and 10% on this side that you don't even talk to. Now it's 17 to 22%. That is the side you don't talk to. So I think we saw a really large showing from Oregonians on where they stood on things, and everybody in this room and our elected officials need to listen to that. But I think what's created that is more divisive. So that's my political consultant non-answer to your question.
Perfectly done, Boss Tweed. But, this is a question maybe a little bit off the center from the other ones. You were all political pros, so I think people would be interested in your response. We were inundated with campaign ads, a lot on the TV and digital and what have you. Well, look, thinking back over the campaign, was there one ad that surprised you that was particularly effective or particularly ineffective? Was there, I mean, obviously an awful lot of people get their information about campaigns in that manner. Was there something that you saw that you said, wow, that's really great and interesting and provocative for the future, or boy, that was a dunderhead of a move in terms of a campaign ad? Rebecca, you want to start off?
Sure, and I won't say it to any specific ad, but I think the the conversation about homelessness that was covered in the gubernatorial campaigns, both from Representative Newt Bueller and Governor Brown, and that came up in other issues. I think that's one of the first times we've really seen that come to a forefront. And I talked to other folks nationally that said, we haven't seen people talking about homelessness. Is it really that big of a deal in Oregon? It's like, it's absolutely a big deal. So not whether one ad was better than the other, but just that we were talking about that. And I think it's a really important issue that I hope is still addressed.
Anna?
Again, without naming specific campaigns, I think we did see the issue of race come up prominently in a couple of ads, which, in my opinion, speaks to the importance of having staff and consultants of color to be able to screen certain things before they go to print, including talking points, right? One thing that I keep saying that I'm really hopeful we stop saying, we are a nation of immigrants. We are not a nation of immigrants, and what a way to invisibilize First Nations and people that are descended from slaves, and it's just it's not accurate, yet it keeps being echoed over and over. So yes, I saw a couple things that could use improvement. That speaks to the need to have more POC behind the scenes.
Jillian?
I was horrified by the priority organ ads, and I hope they never happen again. And I would say I would hold both sides accountable, but I will tell you, I almost lost my job on the Kids Opera 2010 campaign because the Democratic Governors Association shipped an ad to the TV stations here that was horribly inappropriate, and we killed it. We stopped it. We didn't allow it to air, and I threw it under the bus on the record and almost lost my job over it. And we have to hold, I hope I never see those priority organ ads again. And on the flip side, the positive side, some of the online videos that were targeting younger voters this year were creative and awesome, and I think they did the job.
So we will end there with everyone's favorite topic. Our time is up, and we need to pause the discussion. We're adjourned for the day, but please join me in thanking Sky Waters and Steph Routh for producing today's program, and our panelists for being here today. Thank you so much.